Kurdistan is different. As a nation, we are different. As geography, we are different. And Iraq is an artificial state. It was put together to keep some balances. We were promised genuine partnership, but we were never treated as partners. We have suffered a great deal. We have suffered under the successive regimes in Iraq, be that under the Sunni Arab rule or currently under the Shia Arab rule.
In the minds of Kurdish nationalists, it's a dream 99 years deferred.
We are going to hold the referendum. For 100 years, we've been struggling for this day to come, to become an independent state.
If the referendum for Kurdish independence comes to pass, a majority vote for independence is widely expected, despite the fact that there are deep divisions among Iraqi Kurds over the issue.
The question is, can these politicians guarantee that these problems will not get bigger and we will not have a clash between the political parties? This question has to be answered before having the referendum.
The plebiscite will be held in 3 provinces over which the Autonomous Kurdistan Regional Government, or KRG, has control: Erbil, Dohuk, and Sulaymaniyah, in addition to areas disputed by the Kurdish and Baghdad governments. Of particular interest is Kirkuk, an oil-rich province also claimed by Turkmen and Arabs, now controlled by Kurdish forces after the Iraqi army was pushed out by Daesh.
According to the agreement between the Iraqi federal government and the KRG Kurdish Regional Government, the Peshmerga should withdraw from areas which they have advanced after the start of the operation of liberating Mosul.
The Kurdish fighting force, known as the Peshmerga, were instrumental in diminishing Daesh's control in northern Iraq. Still, the US has insisted a referendum would pose a risk to regional stability.
And we've called on the Kurdistan Regional Government to reconsider the decision, and we urge them to pursue a dialogue with the central government on the basis of the Iraqi constitution. All eyes right now must remain fixed on the enemy of Daesh.
Turkey, which shares a border with Iraq, is also opposed to the referendum on similar grounds. Ankara insists on maintaining Iraq's territorial integrity.
The decision by the regional government would contribute to instability in the region. It also violates the constitution of Iraq.
A Kurdish delegation is in Baghdad to hear possible concessions in exchange for postponing the vote. On the table is financial assistance in the range of $10 to $12 billion, which the KRG owes to public work contractors, civil servants, and Peshmerga fighters who haven't been paid in full for several months. Baghdad stopped payments to the KRG after the Kurds began exporting oil independently through a pipeline to Turkey. On the political front is the opportunity to settle disputes over Kirkuk's oil reserves. With the KRG facing opposition from those on which it politically, militarily, and economically relies, some wonder if a referendum at this stage is practical, or whether it's being used as a bargaining chip to strengthen the hand of an ethnic minority that has felt politically repressed for decades. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined here in the studio by Matthew Breiser. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan and is now a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. And from Erbil, we have Dindar Zebari. He's a deputy minister of the Kurdistan Regional Government and also the head of the High Committee to respond to international reports in the KRG's Council of Ministers. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador Breiser, tell me why you think this referendum's a bad idea.
Well, the U.S. government thinks it's a bad idea. Look, the Kurdish people are the largest stateless people in the world. And according to international law, a peoples that has emerged from a process of decolonization has the right to vote on its self-determination. That's a moral and legalistic point. I just think practically it's a bad idea because now is a time when all of Iraq, the Iraqi Kurdistan and federal Iraq are struggling economically, struggling to defeat ISIS, though on the path of victory together with the U.S.-led coalition, and really need to get some of the foreign relations issues lined up to be economically viable, and I mean in particular relations with Turkey.
Dindar Zebari, now is not the time, is what a lot of people are saying, including the Iranians, including Turkey, including the Americans, and Baghdad itself. Tell me why you think it is the time.
Thank you for the opportunity. I believe it's time. It's time for several reasons. The failure of the continuous efforts of Kurdistan Regional Government throughout the last many years with following Iraqi governments in terms of consensus and of course, real participation and genuine participation in the Iraqi political process. It's a time because in terms of security, Iraq has seen collapse since 2003 and prior to 2003, but mainly after 2003, where several other components of militants have occurred rise in Iraq for years, prior to IS, prior to Daesh, and they all have been a threat to KRG region being part of the Iraq. And also it's a time because federalism in Iraq is only on the paper. It has not been implemented, not been indicated as an effort of the government of Baghdad for many years. All the process of federalism and consensus in terms of the participation, the voluntary participation of the Kurdish people or Kurdistan region within Iraq after 2003 has led to failure in all different sort of decentralization in the Iraqi state.
So let me put it to you this way then.
2003.
Sorry to interrupt you. Let me put it to you this way then. If you can get a proper federalism, if you can get proper autonomy, you can win more concessions from Baghdad, would you postpone or cancel it?
Unfortunately, in practice, it has been an effort. All different allies throughout many years. United Nations office in Iraq for many years. Advice being given to Baghdad for many years. 15 UN resolutions passed on Iraq for the renewal of UNAMI in Iraq has pushed for the federalism. The allies have pushed for the federalism. I believe something is wrong in Iraq. This country has been put together by force. It has been kept by force together, and unfortunately it's not working.
It's not working. I mean, the man makes a point, right? People, Ambassador Bryza, are talking about this referendum destabilizing the region. Like, what planet are you living on? Iraq's already a mess. How much worse can it get, right? Maybe this should be given a chance.
I strongly agree that it's hard to be less stable than Iraq currently is or Syria is. But the goal here, I think, shouldn't be so much a look at what was good for the region in terms of stability, but for the Kurdish people themselves. As I said in the beginning, they certainly have a moral right and a legal right to pursue independence. But you know, referenda, as we saw in the case of Brexit, don't always produce the best outcome for the people themselves. I mean, I would argue, I believe Brexit will eventually be overturned. I think that's a different issue, obviously. Right. But my point is that right now, until big pieces such as the economic relationship with federal Iraq is sorted out and energy revenues, and until the Kurdish people have a way to export their hydrocarbon wealth in an agreed way through Turkey and in other directions, it's hard to see in a practical way how you could have a viable state.
Dindar Zebari, Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, saying this risks civil war. You have Turkey, who's an ally of the KRG, not happy. You have the United States not happy with this. You have the situation of Kirkuk, for example, where you have the Arab and Turkmen who are not going to take this lying down, right? Are you prepared for the worst eventualities? Are you prepared for a huge mess?
We already have passed through many of those challenges throughout the 90s, beginning of 1991. And only by the support or through the support of Turkey and Western society, Western countries, KRG region, Kurdistan region has survived. We have seen years without budget. We have seen years without proper support from international community, even later on. But all of these has been an experience. KRG voluntarily joined Baghdad after 2003, promising a new Iraq, promising new support, promising decentralization, failed. Now, in terms of the draft of the oil and gas law with Baghdad, in 2007, the draft is ready, finalized. Still, after 10 years, no further negotiations on that. UN also has failed to push Iraq for the implementation of the Iraqi constitution. There are no guarantees if Kurdistan gives up the date of referendum or referendum path. There are no guarantees, genuine guarantees. I don't mean an ambassador's statement in Baghdad will be enough. I believe what will be the guarantees for Kurdistan future of the people people of Kurdistan, security-wise, economic-wise, political-wise. I think it has to be at the upper level Security Council and at the upper level allies, which is definitely the capitals, Washington, D.C., and many other strongest capital, to give assurances for the people of Kurdistan that future will be decisive for them, for their own protection as well as for the stability of the region. So far, KRG has proven as a fact of stability to neighboring countries. For years, Turkey is in collaboration with KRG for the security of the border.
So why
Iran
change
is in collaboration with KRG with the security of the border.
Why change any of that?
KRG has been a fact. No, KRG has been a fact of stability for these countries, and it will continue definitely with that. Turkey, it's a main ally for the KRG in many different aspects, and has been a very successful relationship. By the way, export of oil today through Turkey, it's not a gift given by Baghdad. It has been a support given by Turkey and different authorities in terms of the support of the people of Kurdistan. So frankly, to say, Turkey has been more of support than Baghdad for the economy as well as for the well-being of the people of Kurdistan. Even through the angelic basis in 90s that has provided provide comfort for the people of Kurdistan. So failure of Baghdad, no linkage with Baghdad, not feeling of responsibility, 2 million IDPs in Kurdistan from Iraq itself, not a single payment or support to the budget of the KRG, disclosure of KRG into international conferences and rest of it to highlight the success and the positive impact of KRG, even within Iraq.
Right.
Iraq deliberately has chosen to demonize KRG for years, and people of Kurdistan is definitely at the end of that patience.
Mr. Zabari, the Kurdish people in the north of Iraq are hardly unanimous when it comes to whether they want independence. You'd be familiar with Mahmoud Othman, veteran politician. I've interviewed him a few times. He was quoted recently as saying, before this referendum, we need to have Kurdish unity and some sort of an understanding with Baghdad. We do not have either. Now, I'm going to put my emphasis on Kurdish unity. There is no Kurdish unity. There is no consensus on this. Are you willing to back down if the Kurdish people decide that they don't want to break away?
This is a democratic process. Results of referendum, new countries will expect 100% that people will vote in favor of one line of choose. Definitely, it's a process of democratization, process of democracy, referendum itself. People of Kurdistan will be given the right to choose whether they would like Kurdistan to become independent or not. This has to be a choice given to the people of Kurdistan. And in terms of the process of the referendum, definitely and certainly major political parties, KDP, PUK, including dozens of political parties, the political elite in Kurdistan, have chosen and have set up a high committee for referendum, and this high committee is composed of all different ethnicities, nationalities, and all the major and middle political parties in Kurdistan region. Yesterday they have been in Baghdad. They came back from Baghdad. Negotiations are ongoing with Baghdad. It's a process, and this process is not something black and white. It needs evaluation. It needs assessment. It needs, of course, all different channels of communications. But process already has started. This is the main bottom line of it.
Yeah, the process has started there. Those calling for a postponement, a cancellation, but it seems as if this is going ahead as we speak. It's going to happen in September. I want to talk about Daesh for a moment now. Daesh is at the center of the argument against the referendum happening. Let's have a listen to what Masoud Barzani had to say about Daesh and about Mosul.
I have big concerns about the situation in Mosul and about post-liberation, because the end of Daesh in Mosul doesn't mean the end of Daesh. Those factors, the environment that brought it into Mosul, have not changed. I have a big concern about the future of the area. I hope I will be wrong.
So, Daesh at the center of this, and I want to bring in Matthew Breiser here. Part of the argument is that there's a fight against Daesh, and this referendum will allow people to take their eye off the ball. Daesh would probably love this referendum to happen, and this would scupper the fight against Daesh. It sounds like a nice theory, but is it true? How is it true?
Well, I mean, maybe that's going a little bit too far, but what is true is that these big national struggles, whether it be a referendum that's a complicated process, as Mr. Zabari was just saying, or the ongoing negotiations between the Kurdistani Regional Government and the federal government of Iraq over a myriad of issues, or the fight against Daesh, or getting the economy going again. All these things require great effort by national leaders, by local leaders, and a lot of time. And so, you know, sometimes a referendum has a bit of a bread and circus impact. It helps to resolve internal political problems, again, like in the case of David Cameron and Brexit,
right.
But it creates a whole new range of problems that are that suck all the oxygen out of the political system and make it very difficult to concentrate on what other priorities may be out there, and it's hard to imagine a higher priority than defeating Daesh.
Okay, so Dindar Zabari, use that oxygen right now. There's limited oxygen right now. Use it to defeat Daesh and then have your referendum. How about that?
I believe, again, the experience with Baghdad in the fight against IS or Daesh has been another very much successful one. It has been successful in terms of the combat, but in terms of the supplies and inclusion of Peshmerga forces within Iraqi national defense system or support to Peshmerga forces throughout the last 3 years, it has been quite failure from Baghdad. Baghdad has stopped, has been rejecting many of those supplies to Peshmerga forces, even during the time of the battle with IS. Daesh. That's why being part of the state of Iraq in terms of the IS defeat or IS battle, I don't think it will change anymore. Sorry, it will not be very much relevant. In contrary to that, KRG by itself, by its own relations, by its own reliance on the international coalition from Erbil, it has been more successful, more organized under one national command. It has the only forces in Iraq, throughout Iraq, as a unified force in terms of the instruction and leadership. And we have all seen the Peshmerga success throughout the last 3 years. So definitely is not very much linked to the state of Iraq or being part of the Iraq or being part of the negotiations with Iraq. Because as we know all, the collapse of Iraqi forces in 2013 and 14 and handover most of those equipments and machinery as well as land to the Daesh, that has been a quite collapse and an experience that, frankly, KRG does not want anymore to experience with new Iraq or with the rest of the Iraq. It wants to have boundaries very clear in terms of protection of its own people, and those boundaries have been fully should be supported by the forces from KRG, not very much as before collapsed by the Iraqi forces in the past.
Is that a reasonable argument, Matthew Breiser, that they earned the right to have their own country, given that they were the only or one of the few respectable fighting forces in the country at the time when the Iraqi army folded, when Daesh was spreading through?
I think it's definitely a legitimate argument, on top of the fact that Iraqi Kurdistan has become a fully functioning political entity or state, and therefore merits the opportunity at self-determination. My point, again, is simply the fundamental point is that there are so many factors that need to be in place for a new political entity to thrive, to survive. So many relationships that have to be built. They're not in place right now. So it's understandable that the emotions are there, that the, certain Iraqi Kurdish leaders say enough is enough. Baghdad has been quite problematic, hasn't been helpful, and you've got obviously the Shia split with Kurds and pro-Iranian political forces in Baghdad. Very complex picture. Understandable that people get emotional at some point and say enough is enough, but you know, having an independence referendum, if it passes, it may not, but most likely will, and if it does, though, that's the equivalent in a negotiation of kids in a football match and one kid gets angry and picks up his ball and goes home. You can do that once. And then what? You have to live another day.
Right. And you've been at the table in the past. You've been advising the president, the chiefs of staff, and so on at the Security Council. So they call you in now. Washington is not happy with this referendum going ahead right now. It's doing all it can to say, hey, postpone it, think again, and so on. But if it goes ahead, how does this Trump administration balance their policy towards the KRG? Clearly, it's not going to abandon them. But how does it find that middle ground between we're not happy with what you're doing, but we're still your ally and we need you? How does it do that?
My guess is the administration should simply not talk about the referendum and let the political forces on the ground in Iraq decide what happens after, let's say, there is an affirmative vote. My guess is implementation of that vote will be very difficult. And you touched on Kirkuk. I mean, Kirkuk, having a vote in Kirkuk, that's a tinderbox, right? And that's really opening up a whole new area of conflict. So it's not clear to me that this, even if it is a yes vote, it will be implemented. So if I were the Trump administration, I'd let that play out. But in the meantime, do everything possible to shore up my relations with Turkey, encouraging Turkey and the Iraqi Kurdish government to work closely together. And then what my friends and colleagues, our ambassador in Baghdad, Doug Silliman, and others do every day, which is try to put Humpty Dumpty back together again and do everything possible to build connectivity between the various factions in Iraq.
Dindar Zebari, we're running out of time, so I'm going to give you the final word here. What's your message to your friends who are not happy with the referendum? What's your message to Turkey? What's your message to the Americans? They're your friends, but they don't want this referendum to go ahead. In 30 seconds, speak to them. Tell them what you think.
I believe future independent Kurdistan will be a fact of stability. It will be definitely in a partnership with those regional countries, regional states. It has proven that. This is not only a slogan or a promise, it has been an experience and implementation. Failure of Iraq and being part of the failure state will not contribute anything more. I believe it's time for the Iraqi people to decide for themselves what sort of political statute, what sort of political definition they would like to choose for their own sake and for their own future. And this has to be the right of the people of Iraq, and including Iraqi Kurdistan.
Big month ahead for the KRG, for Iraq and the region as a whole. I've got to move on. Dindar Zebari and Matthew Bryza, it's been a pleasure having both of you on the program.